feeling tired, weary, or beat up today, this one's for you.
Now, we're going to be a little heavy on scripture, but I want you to bear with me because I promise it's going to be worth it.
All right, we're going to start in Hebrews 4. He says, "For the good news has also been proclaimed to us, just as it was to them. But the message they heard didn't do them any good, because those who heard it did not combine it with trust."
So what Paul's talking about here is the Israelites, after they left Egypt, they were prepared to enter into the promised land, but they sent spies in ahead of them. And when the spies came back, they said that there were giants in the promised land. And so the Israelites feared for their lives and refused to enter. And as a result, God said that they would no longer be allowed to enter into the promised land, and the next generation would have to wait basically until everybody died off until the next generation came, and then the next generation would be allowed to enter.
Which is why Paul continues here. He says, "For it is we who have trusted who enter the rest." So the promised land is often referred to as God's rest. It is just as he said, "And in my anger I swore that they would not enter my rest," referring to the promised land.
He swore this even though his works have been in existence since the foundation of the universe. For there is a place where it is said concerning the seventh day, "And God rested on the seventh day from all his works." And once more, our present text says, "They will not enter my rest."
Therefore, since it still remains for some to enter it, and those who received the good news earlier did not enter, he again fixes a certain day, today, saying through David, so long afterward in the text already given, "Today, if you hear God's voice, don't harden your hearts." For if Yehoshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken later of another day.
Now, what he's referring to is Yehoshua was supposed to lead the Israelites into the promised land, and the group of Israelites that were part of that generation who feared the giants and refused to enter, they're the ones who didn't enter into the rest, and which is why it's saying here that Yehoshua was not able to give them rest or allow them to enter into the rest. And so another day is set forth, a day in the future where we will enter into God's rest.
So there remains a Shabbat, or a Sabbath, or a rest keeping for God's people. For the one who has entered God's rest has also rested from his own works, as God did from his. Therefore, let us do our best to enter that rest, so that no one will fall short because of the same kind of disobedience.
All right, now there's a lot to unpack there, but I'm not going to unpack it yet because I want to go into 2 additional scriptures, and then I'm going to tie all this together and show you what this means and how it pertains to us today.
Okay, in Matthew 11:28, Jesus says, "Come to me, all of you who are struggling and burdened, and I will give you rest.
Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls."
Now, isn't that interesting? So we see Paul talks about a rest that we enter. We enter into God's rest, okay? Resting from our works. And what does Jesus say? He says the same thing. He says, "Those of you who are struggling and burdened." And we'll talk about what you're struggling against and why you're feeling burdened here in a minute. But those of you who are struggling, burdened, come to me, and I will give you rest.
Okay, one more scripture and we're going to pull all this together. So now we're going to move to Matthew 8. It says, "Jesus boarded a boat, and his Talmudim disciples followed. Then, without warning, a furious storm arose on the lake, so that the waves were sweeping over the boat. But Yeshua was sleeping."
Or you might say, he was resting.
And so the disciples came and roused him, saying, "Sir, help, we're about to die." And he said to them, "Why are you afraid? So little trust you have." Then he got up and rebuked the wind and waves, and there was a dead calm.
Okay, so the question is, how is it that Jesus was asleep in the midst of the storm? How was he at rest in the midst of the storm?
Well, let's go back to the Israelites. Why were they not able to enter into God's rest? It's because they feared for their lives. Okay, they feared for their lives. There were giants in the land, and they feared for their lives. That's why they weren't able to enter into God's rest.
Now notice the difference in Jesus' response. Jesus was at rest in the midst of the storm, a storm that was severe enough. Like, you got to bear in mind, like, these are experienced fishermen. These are guys who have been in storms before. So for the men in the boat to be fearful to the point that they went and woke Jesus up, that means that this storm was a terrifying storm. And yet, Jesus was at rest.
The reason he was at rest is that he didn't fear for his life.
And so the question is, why did he not fear for his life?
Alrighty, ready to have your minds blown? We're going to go to one more scripture.
All right, in 2 Kings, there's this story about a widow and a prophet. It goes like this. It says, "Then this word of Adonai came to him," speaking of Elisha. "Get up, go to Zarephath, a village in Sidon, and live there. I have ordered a widow there to provide for you." And so he set out and went to Zarephath. On reaching the gate of the city, he saw a widow gathering sticks. He called to her, "Please bring a little water in a container for me to drink." As she was going to get it, he called after her, "Please bring me a piece of bread in your hand." And she answered, "As Adonai your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of meal in a pot and a little oil in a jug. Here I am, gathering a couple of sticks of wood so that I can go and cook it for myself and my son. After we have eaten that, we will die."
Okay, so a little bit of context here. There was a famine in the land. And so this woman had just enough food left for her and her son to have one last meal. And so they were preparing to have that last meal. And their intention was that they were going to starve to death. It was just understood. There was no food in the land. They were out of food. They were about to use up the last that they had. And so they were just preparing essentially to die.
But Elisha said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go and do what you said. But first, use a little bit of it to make me a small loaf of bread and bring it out to me. After that, make food for yourself and your son. For this is what Adonai, the God of Israel, says: the pot of meal will not get used up, nor will there fail to be oil in the jug, until the day Adonai sends rain down on the land." And she went and acted according to what Elisha had said, and he and her household had food to eat for a long time. The pot of meal did not get used up, nor did there fail to be oil in the jug, in fulfillment of the word of Adonai spoken through Elisha. Okay, so let's tie all this together. So we have three characters here. We have the widow, we have Jesus, and we have the Israelites. Now let's start with the widow. So the thing that made the widow different from the Israelites is that the Israelites feared for their lives. And as a result of that, when God gave them the promise, the way forward, right, which was to enter into the promised land, they feared for their lives, and they didn't trust that God had the capability of preserving their lives.
The widow, on the other hand, had a different situation. She had already determined that her life was over, as indicated by the text. She was about to make her last meal for her and her son. She had already rendered her life in the body as dead, as complete. It was over. They weren't going to survive this.
And so as a result, there is no fear of death. A man who has accepted his fate has no fear of death. So when the prophet came and said to take of the little bit that you have left and give some to me, and then Adonai will move on your behalf to ensure that you survive, because she had no fear of death, she was able to then enter in through faith into the rest of God's provision. Now we'll continue this in the next teaching, where I'll tie Jesus back into this and show you how all of this correlates to entering into God's rest, how we rest from striving, and how we enter into God's peace.
Oh, and as always, if you found this helpful, give it a repost. And of course, if there's some topic you'd like me to speak more on, or if you have a question about the teaching, drop it in the comments. Happy to make a video to explain further. See you guys in the next one.
Of God's provision.